Organic Federation of Canada. In our country, we love organic food. The Canadian Organic Standards define the principles and practices that all certified producers and processors have to comply with, and they need to be fully reviewed every 5 years to remain applicable and accurate. The Organic Federation of Canada launched the full standards review process in 2013, and now, after 2 years of consultations, meetings, and discussions, the revised Canadian Organic Standards will soon be published in November 2015. How was the review performed? What have been the main challenges? And as certified operators certainly want to know, what are the main modifications to the standards that they will have to comply with? We decided to invite the main players of the review to answer these questions. I would like to start with Hugh Martin, the chair of the technical committee. So, Hugh, first, that would be great if you could explain what is the Technical Committee on Organic Agriculture and what is the role of the Technical Committee?
Officially, the Technical Committee on Organic Agriculture is appointed by the Canadian General Standards Board, which is a division of Public Works and General Services Canada, a branch of the Canadian government, also known as the CGSB. But I prefer to think of the Technical Committee as a group of approximately 100 leading members of the organic community in Canada, each with a high level of expertise in their field. There are approximately 45 voting members who each represent organizations with an interest in organic food production, and the non-voting members have keen interest in the standards but have chosen not to vote for a variety of reasons. The Technical Committee writes and revises the standards and advises the CGSB, who has the responsibility to guide us in proper procedures to write the national standard for Canada on organic agriculture. Standards are then approved by the Standards Council of Canada and referenced by the Federal Organic Product Regulations.
So, how was the review performed? Can you explain how it was? What were the main procedures?
Well, first we had our list of outstanding issues that came from either unresolved issues from previous meetings, public comments from previous ballots, as well as newer issues forwarded from the Standards Interpretation Committee or general public. We sorted those 400 plus items into crops, livestock, and processing issues for each document, the Principles and Management Standard, as well as the Permitted Substances list, and a working group of committee members and others with expertise in that area then worked together as a working group, meeting by conference call to discuss each issue in detail and come to a consensus. This also included a lot of research by members or by the working group convener on the issues and options for resolution. In many cases, there was a range of opinion on the issue, and in some cases consensus was difficult due to various production methods and regional differences across the country.
When you accepted to be the chair of the technical committee, what were your goals and what did you have in mind? What was your main objective?
Well, I've been involved in the technical committee since 1997, so I knew that we had a long working list of outstanding issues. I also knew we had limited time and funding to make the changes. My goal was to review all the items on the work list as effectively and efficiently as possible and to create a better standard. I'm very pleased that I think we accomplished those goals with 12 days of meetings and many, many hours of conference calls and research by some very dedicated conveners and working group members and other volunteers who participated throughout the process.
So, so we had many working groups making recommendations. We know that the technical committee met 4 times to resolve to analyze the recommendations from the working groups.
Yeah, we had 4 3-day meetings, and each of the working groups, they presented their proposals on each of the work list items as to whether changes were needed and what those changes might be, and in some cases, those were lively discussions on trying to come to those resolutions.
And also in December 2015, 14, pardon me, the CFIA asked if the aquaculture standards could be merged with the agriculture standard, and it looks like this merge was not so successful. Can you summarize what went wrong and what are next steps regarding this project?
Well, last winter we were presented with an opportunity to see if we could merge the land-based organic food production standards with the organic aquaculture standards. And a new working group worked very hard all winter to get a viable merged standard that would represent everybody's interest, and this was presented at our May Technical Committee meeting for discussion. And the discussion was very informative, and it was quite lively at times. But we were not able to complete the merge as the differences were too great. But I think we made tremendous progress towards that end, and I think it will likely happen in the future. Our time frame was just too short, and we had too many people who did not understand enough about the issues that others in the group faced. But I think we did advance our mutual understanding of the issues. And I think it also is fair to say the aquaculture group is now planning to revise their standards, and I'm sure it will continue to parallel our standards in many ways.
Yeah, that would be great for the Canadian sector. Now that we better understand the role of the working group, I will ask Jean Duval, who is the convener, I repeat, of the crop production working group, the maple section 7.2, mushroom section 7.3, sprout section 7.4, greenhouse production 7.5, and 7.6 that is wild crops. Jean, if we talk first about the crop production issues, there was a request to have a parallel production introduced in the Canadian standards. How was it managed, and what are the final results of this request?
Well, actually, the parallel production was already allowed for perennial crops and for processing, and in some, under particular conditions, for livestock production. So many growers were asking that it be allowed also for annual crops. In the United States, this is the case. It's allowed, parallel production is allowed for all kinds of organic production. And the people in favor of allowing parallel production for annual crops were saying mostly that it would ease transition in some cases, and also that it's already possible to do it by having two different companies, one in charge of the organic crops and one in charge of the conventional crops. So why not just allow it? And annual crop producers are just as competent to maintain records. Well, some people think differently, and they say that, well, for example, in Europe, parallel production is allowed just as it is now in Canada, only for perennial crops and seed and transplant production. Also, they maintain that it's very difficult to assess the entirety of an enterprise, some which are very, very large. There might be an increasing cost of certification and potentially higher risk of fraud. There was no consensus around the table at the TC. We were unable to reach a consensus, so we opted for the statu quo.
The TC being the technical committee, just for
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah. So that's basically what happened, and that was the main issue for the crop production section of the standards. That was really the main one, and I think there's a movement, maybe at the next revision will be right for allowing parallel production, but right now it was not possible, and it would have been very, very difficult to reach consensus, and would have probably become very complicated in the writing anyway to reach consensus. So that's the situation now.
So you were also responsible for the mushroom section. You had to resolve an issue regarding the straw used in mushroom production. What was this issue that you were requested to resolve?
Well, the text of the standards was not very clear concerning the use of straw in mushroom production. Some large organic mushroom growers cannot find enough organic straw, and the standard was not clear, so if they could use composted conventional straw for growing mushrooms or not. And some CBs, I mean, the interpretation by CBs was also different, so it was very important to make it clear. And the mushroom task group proposed to the technical committee that conventional straw could be used as long as it's composted in growing organic mushrooms. But if not composted, it has to be organic straw.
And when it is composted, can you remind us about how long it has to be composted? There are directives regarding the compost.
Well, yeah, that's specified actually in the permanent substance list. The crop section of the PSL specifies the what concerns composting feedstocks and if you compost on farm or if you buy compost off farm, what are the criteria? But usually for compost to be acceptable for organic, you have to reach a certain temperature for a certain time or demonstrate that there are no pathogens. And then there are all other concerns about heavy metals and other contaminants, but I would refer whoever's interested to the permanent substance list section.
Now, under the sprout production system, if we look at the 2006 version and the revised version, there is a huge difference between the two sections. Well, what are the new elements that you introduced in the sprout section production?
Well, actually we changed the title of the section to include sprouts, shoots, and microgreens. And we define these similar type of production as being plants that are harvested within 30 days after imbibition of the seeds. And this distinction was not made in the 2006 version of the standards. And there was confusion. Some of the certification bodies were considering that shoots grown in soil should be considered as greenhouse crops, and others did not. So we made sure that everything was very clear, that the standards are clear for if you grow sprouts in water or shoots on a soil medium. And the question remains about the origin of seeds. For sprouts, in the sprout section, there was already a requirement for using only organic seeds, no derogation possible. So what's the case for shoots grown in soil? And there was a bit of a debate, and the sprouts task group, there was no unanimity there. And but after all, you know, for the vast majority of species grown for sprouts or shoots, organic seeds are available. So it was voted by the technical committee actually that organic seeds be required not only for sprouts grown in water, but also for shoots grown on a growth medium.
So the market,
yeah.
So the market will have to adapt to this new requirement.
Definitely. I know it's not everyone is happy about this, and for very particular crops, it might be an issue. And it's a rapidly expanding market, so we'll see. But I think TC members were there was a consensus reached. Yeah, because these plants are so small when you sell them, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
One of the other sections you were responsible for is the greenhouse production. You introduced an interesting requirement, that is the quantity, the volume of soil per square meter that the growers have to have in their containers. Why was it necessary to introduce that volume of soil?
The thing is that as long as we have no specification for the volume of soil required, especially for tomatoes grown in containers or cucumbers or large crops, we're not talking about lettuce and microgreens here. There's a temptation that people would want to meet the standards by having a minimum of soil volume and really going away from the principle of organic, which is feed the soil to feed the plants. And then you're into an hydroponic system where you feed the plant directly, and the soil medium is just, well, it doesn't have to be fertile, it doesn't have to contribute to plant growth, you know, it's all. And that's very contrary to the organic principles. And although there was some debate at the TC, and some people wanted to open this debate again and eventually allow hydroponic organic, the consensus was to stay with prohibition of hydroponic and organic, and to better, how do you say, to have a little more detailed standards, precise standards for container growing, so that no one could, how do you say, just go by, you know, pretending to have a nutritious soil and not and using hydroponics. Yeah.
So just as a precision, now the requirement is to have 70 liters of soil per square meter of container volume. That is correct?
Yes, and there's also a specification for the depth of the soil medium. So basically, it ensures that there's a sufficient volume that you have real soil interactions in there. You know, soil life is active, and there's a dynamic like in a real soil, not just spoon feeding the plants. Yeah.
So that is great to hear that in 2015, that is the year of the soil.
Mm-hmm.
So, and finally, Jean, maple products. I think you found a solution to the cleaning of the membranes, and I think the sector was really impatient to see that modification. What is it about exactly?
Well, in modern day maple syrup production, the heart of the operation is the osmosis filter, where you take the sap and you concentrate the sap so that the sugar concentration is higher before boiling it. So it's really the heart of the operation, and the membranes themselves are kind of fragile, they need to be cleaned periodically, even during production, because they get clogged with minerals and organic matter particles. And what we had in the standards was allowing during the season to use pure NaOH, sodium hydroxide, as a cleaner. But the reality is that sodium hydroxide just by itself doesn't do a very good job. It's better to use it in conjunction with a soap, and also in some cases to use different products. So it was important to allow new cleaning products for osmosis membranes. And if the membrane has better performance, it takes a lot less energy to produce maple syrup. So I think it's very ecological, as long as the cleaning products do not contaminate the environment. And that's this provision is also in the standards. You're making sure that first of all, that there's enough dilution and a rinsing of the membranes after using cleaning products, and then the remaining water is disposed of correctly.
So your new measure, you are still protecting the integrity of the organic product at the end of the production line.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, Jean, thank you very much for reporting about the changes that you have introduced in the sector with your working group.
You're welcome.
We have the pleasure to interview Maureen Bostock, who was the convener of the Permitted Substances List Crop Working Group, and who was also the convener of the GMO Task Force. So Maureen, just as a reminder, when we launched the review in 2013, you were a member of the Permitted Substances List Crop Working Group. Who was the convener at that time?
That's correct. And the convener at that time was Linda Edwards, who was convener for a very long period, as I recall, and did some absolutely fabulous work in bringing the standards up to the point where she retired in 2014.
Yeah. So then you replaced her, and you've been very active, and you have introduced many changes to the standard. And one of these modifications were really to clarify the use of biodegradable mulches. What did you do? What motivated that change?
Yes, it was an extremely important piece of work that we engaged in, upgrading the biodegradable mulches annotation. In Table 4.3, the annotation for mulches, which included fully biodegradable films, did permit those substances, provided they did not contain any prohibited substances. This was not a very clear annotation, so we've rewritten it to make it much clearer, to say that 100% of the biodegradable mulch films must be derived from bio-based sources, and that formulants or ingredients must be listed on Tables 4.2 or 4.3 to be included. Go ahead.
Yeah, so when you say that it is bio-based sources, it means that it has to be vegetable sources?
It has to be sources that are non-synthetic and that are plant-based substances that are fully biodegradable in the type of material, in the ground essentially. Substances such as that are from petroleum sources or from genetically modified sources are not permitted.
But they are tolerated until January 26th 17, aren't they?
That's correct. And so what we've realized is that the industry has portrayed the mulches that are currently on the market as though they are fully biodegradable in soil. And that claim that they've made has misled all of us, really, to believe that they were from fully bio-based sources. In fact, they did contain materials that were from petroleum sources. So the technical committee has provided an allowance for producers to continue to use these products which may not meet the petroleum source requirements without removal until January 1st, 2017. And what we know is that the biomulch industry is working very hard to create a 100% bio-based product for organic farmers. And in fact, one is currently being field tested in Europe.
So now I see that when we look at Table 4.2, we don't always recognize it from where it was in the 2006 version. You've made dramatic changes to Table 4.2. Why have you undertaken this reorganization?
In the previous version, minerals were listed in Table 4.2 alphabetically with many duplications, and the minerals, therefore, were scattered throughout the table without any organization. What we did in this particular revision is we decided to bring minerals together and cluster them under the name of the mineral so that it would be easier for operators to find what would be the allowable forms of those mineral sources. And within the annotation, then, there are paragraphs for each type of substance. So, for example, under the general heading of potassium, you'll find 4 listings: langbonite, potassium rock powder, potassium chloride, and potassium sulfate. And each one of these is followed by the restrictions that apply. For example, potassium chloride contains the restriction on the buildup of salt in the soil from the chloride element, and potassium sulfate cannot be made from sulfuric acid or be fortified with synthetic chemicals. So by doing this, we hope that we've made it easier for operators and certifiers and inspectors to be able to find all the different forms of the minerals, but under the heading of the name of the mineral.
Oh. That's great. And you also removed some restriction on the pH in the fish products. What was the issue? The fish products was unstable. What motivated that modification?
The restriction on the pH in fish products originally was put in place to prevent the overuse of phosphoric acid as a plant nutrient. So in other words, as a kind of a top-up of the nutrient profile of the fish product, when what we only allow it to be used as is as a stabilizer to prevent rancidity. So we thought that we needed to require a specific pH, but we found that we could leave that judgment to certifiers to determine if the levels of acid were excessive, and that allows a greater range of products to be available in the marketplace.
You also introduced new soil amendments, so it is a clear modernization of the inputs such as Biochar and anaerobic digestate.
Yes, these are 2 new substances that have come onto into our sort of our range of products that we have access to for soil amendments. Biochar is a very interesting substance, and it's basically made from wood that has been burned at very specific temperatures so that it becomes a stable form of carbon. Carbon is a very important nutrient that we have in our soils, in particular for feeding microorganisms. And soils that are very depleted or soils that are very sandy and have difficulty retaining nutrients can be amended with biochar or other forms of carbon, and through that help to stabilize the nutrients in the soil. So we did restrict the annotation to using forestry byproducts as a source, because we do not want to contribute to increased deforestation, for the sake of being able to amend our soils with this wonderful new substance. So I think it will be very helpful to people who have soils that are thin or depleted, and of course there are other sources of carbon, such as plowing down straw from a grain crop or putting in a cover crop. But this is another tool in our toolkit.
And what about anaerobic digestate? What is
Yes.
it? Some people are not familiar
people,
with this.
Yeah, this is a new one as well that has really it's come about very interestingly. When people look at animal manure, we think about producing compost. And of course, compost is an aerobic process which creates a very stable source of nutrients for farms. Anaerobic processes basically do exactly the same thing using bacteria that thrive in anaerobic conditions. And so basically manure, for example, or crop residues are placed in a sealed container and allowed to ferment using anaerobic bacteria, and the result is the production of methane. The methane is then drawn off and can be used to fuel a generator on the farm. This is something that has become quite commonplace now on dairy farms because they have access to a lot of manure and they need a lot of power to operate their dairy parlors. So basically what you have at the end is you have the methane that's been taken off and used to power the generator, and you have the residue, which is a compost-like material.
Ah, yeah.
And of course it isn't compost because it hasn't been produced aerobically, but still it does contain many of the nutrients present in the source materials and can be added to a compost or it can be further broken down by other microbes in an aerobic process, or it can be applied as a raw manure following the requirements in 32.310.
One of the other modifications was to allow the use of clove oil to control sprouting in potatoes in storage. That was not allowed before?
That's right, and this is very interesting. This is a new development. The research has been done over the last few years, and researchers have found that a number of essential oils are capable of controlling sprouting in potatoes, but clove oil has been shown to be the most effective. Clove oil, how it's used is basically it's applied as an aerosol, and it's not applied to the surface of the potatoes, but released into the air in the storage facilities when the potatoes reach the end of their dormant phase. And it's applied at a rate of 30 to 90 parts per million, and it's applied at approximately 3 to 6 week intervals. And basically it controls sprouting in potatoes in storage. This has been a very serious problem for organic potato farmers who have, large volumes of potatoes in storage. And potatoes have kind of a genetic predisposition to reach the end of, to have a dormancy phase. And when they reach the end of their dormancy phase, they sprout. And of course, once potatoes are sprouted, as I'm sure you've seen in the grocery store, nobody wants to buy them. So by applying this naturally occurring oil from, basically an essential oil to the potato sprouts that occur at the end of the dormancy period in the storage facility are actually they collapse, and the potatoes then continue to be sold for fresh market use.
But it is like, it seems so strange to hear that you would spray clove oil. I guess it is organic clove oil, and then that would block the sprouting. It is quite a.
I know it sounds very odd to think that one plant can affect another, but if you think of what happens when apples are stored in the same facility with potatoes, the apples work in the opposite direction. They encourage sprouting because the apples release ethylene that sprouts the potatoes. So it's the same principle. The only difference is that in this case, it's another plant that works in the opposite direction. So the clove oil does not have to be certified organic to be used in this manner. It's being used as a
production aid.
As a production aid, yes.
Oh, interesting. So besides taking care of tables 4.2 and 4.3, Maureen, you were the convener of the GMO task force, and we know how GMO contamination has become a very important issue for organic agriculture. So you have introduced a clause that describes isolation distances to implement to help preventing contamination. What are they, and what are the rules behind implementing isolation distances?
Yes, thank you for starting with this one. It's very important, and it's extremely true that GMOs have become more and more a very serious issue for organic producers. What we did in this the new version is we built on the current version of 32310 Section 5.2 environmental factors, which required operators to protect their crops from contamination by prohibited substances. What we realized is that in order to be able to actually be having a standard that was effective, we needed to build in more particulars to enable farmers in particular, as well also handlers, to understand the kind of detail that they need to have in place in order to be successful in avoiding that contamination. So the first one is in Section 4 record keeping, 4.4.4, we added the requirement that operators design and implement a risk management plan to prevent GE contamination. And so what this basically does is it means that, for many farmers are already, at the beginning of the season, they look at how they're going to manage that issue. But what this does is it stimulates the requirement that they have those records in writing and they be available for review by the inspector. And so that could include their mitigation strategies that they're using, if they're testing seeds, as also their equipment and storage sanitation protocols. Operators must use mitigation strategies if their at-risk crops are closer to a GMO crop than listed isolation distances. The commonly recognized isolation distances have been provided as a reference in an information note to ensure that operators are aware of how far pollen travels. For example, soybeans, 10 meters, corn, 300 meters, canola and alfalfa if it's used for seed production, and apples, 3 kilometers. Now, mitigation strategies are used these days by many farmers to be able to offset isolation distances. And so some examples of those that have been demonstrated to be very effective: delayed planting, typically, for example, 2 weeks for field corn, is very effective at avoiding having
the cross-pollination.
Sorry?
Having the cross-pollination?
Having cross-pollination, yes, thank you. And given that GMO corn is treated with fungicidal seed treatments that provide cold soil vigor, they are usually planted much earlier than organic corn anyway. Of course, in years where there's heavy rains, delayed planting might not be the only strategy that one could use. So another one is strategic testing. Strategic testing is an excellent strategy to use when delayed planting is less successful in a year where everybody's crop is coming on at the same time. Strategic testing works in combine widths and tests into the crop until a negative test is achieved, with the outer rows being sold as conventional. Of course, there are other strategies. Planting a crop which is taller than the at-risk crop on the side of prevailing winds, such as sunflowers, for example, is very useful in trapping the pollen. Another important consideration is redesigning the rotation to place the at-risk crop in a less vulnerable field. Take a look in the spring, take a look at the crops that your neighbors are planting, and re-examine your rotation to determine if you've selected a good field for a crop that would be vulnerable. The other question, of course, is whether or not planting tree hedges would be helpful. And, of course, planting tree hedges around the perimeter of your farm can be very, very useful. When insect pollination is present, the use of dedicated pollinators can ensure that the crop is pollinated quickly and completely before visiting pollinators from other orchards arrive. We also added one other requirement in 815 handling to put a little more emphasis on preventing commingling of organic crops and conventional, which may contain trace GMO. We're asking operators to improve their signage, to have signage on permanent or temporary bins that identify the bin as organic, and also on wagons that are in transit that identify the wagon as an organic wagon. The purpose of this is that we know that at harvest time, everyone is very busy, and there's a lot of movement of wagons back and forth. So in an operation which handles both organic and conventional crops, it's so extremely important that those be kept separate.
So, and also we are asked sometimes when we talk about the review, was there a threshold established as the one that is in the EU? Have you discussed about that?
We discussed it at great length. I mean, I would say at great length. But establishing a threshold at this point was determined by the GMO task force as being premature. What we wanted to do was to take a very balanced and very cautious approach to move operators, farmers, and handlers into into a situation where they were more in control of managing their risks. But we can see within 5 years that we may be looking at that time at establishing the next review threshold, and hopefully by then there will be more work done on an international level to establish one threshold, so that farmers and handlers can be assured that whatever we have in our standards is matched by our allies in the worldwide organic movement.
Yeah, because there is currently no threshold in the U.S. Standard.
That is correct.
Standard.
And so when there is no threshold, the assumption, and because standards like our organic standard and the United States organic standard, these are process standards. We are based upon the principle that we are, if we follow the standard, we are doing our best possible effort to avoid contamination. And that is the best that we can do. Going from a process standard to a product standard would be quite a significant change, and we could then look at using testing to a standard, to a threshold. For GMOs, we could also employ that for pesticides. But that's a major transformation, and we'll take another revision of the standards to start to answer those questions.
Yeah, and you're right, because all the measures are taken to prevent GMO contaminations, but you still had to make some concessions regarding inputs that would be grown on substrates, on GE substrates. What is this new approach that you have introduced?
Yes, and that's a very, very good question. And the current standard prohibits GMOs in section 1.4.1a of 32.310, but it does allow vaccines, provided that the GMO component is the substrate it is grown on and not the vaccine itself. What has happened since that version was published, we've realized that so many more products are being produced through biofermentation. The industry is moving rapidly, developing new substance, and many of those substances were originally extracted from plants. For example, citric acid, which is now being produced through biofermentation. So the question that we were faced with was, if we want to continue to use microbials, whether they be yeasts or bacteria or inoculants, such as rhizobium inoculants, we had to find a way to be able to extend the allowance for vaccines to other products of biofermentation, but still maintain a degree of control over whether GMOs would actually be present in the substances we were using. And so we have determined that we've extended the allowance to all substances produced through biofermentation, but the GMO component can only be the substrate. And if a substrate is grown on a GMO substrate, it can only be used if there's no commercially available alternative.
And if some residues of the substrate is not present with the input that the producer would use.
That's right. So, for example, there are some new products that are coming that where people want to market to organic producers, products that are the leftovers after biofermentation production, and if that leftover contains the GMO, any GMO
residues,
bacteria, yes, it cannot be used. If it contains substances that are not listed in Table 4.2 or 4.3, it cannot be used. But a GMO substance that is grown on a GMO substrate, so for example, a microbial such as Rhizobium inoculant, for example, it may be grown on a GMO substrate, but if there's no GMO substrate present in the final product, in other words, you're just using the microbial, that is allowed.
So, are you satisfied with all the new measures, that you introduced in the review that you just completed?
Yes, I think that we made some major changes. I think the standard is easier to read, and we always think about farmers and handlers sitting down with their organic standard, and we hope that the changes that we've made have really provided sort of an easier document, a document that flows better, that reads well, where it's easier to find what you're looking for. We did make one other change that I should mention, in that we originally had the information about GE substrates in 1.4.1, but instead we developed this new language in a general paragraph that's at the beginning of each table in 32.3.11. So, for example, paragraph 4.1.4 applies to the substances in table 4.2 and 4.3, and this is the allowance for the GMO substrates. So by placing this in a general paragraph at the beginning of each of the groups of tables, we're ensuring that the paragraph applies to all products of biofermentation. So that kind of minor change makes the information more accessible when you go to table 4.2, 4.3, or the livestock tables, or etc. It makes the information more accessible as you're working through the tables.
So thank you very much, Maureen. That was really informative. Thank you.
You're welcome.